I'd like to call this meeting to order, this regular City Council work session of Tuesday, September 15th. The clerk will call the roll.
Mayor Walcott.
Here.
Councilmember Biondo.
Here.
Councilmember Villanueva.
Here.
Councilmember Hall. Councilmember Tandy.
Here.
And Councilmember Winters is excused.
Thank you. And if you'll all please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Next item is call to the public. Is there anyone that wishes to speak to us on this item in the workshop this evening?
I don't have any forms, Mayor.
Okay. Regular session agenda is non-public hearings, and so item number 1.
The Capital Scholar students will conduct a bill presentation.
Good evening, and if you would introduce yourself for the record.
Thank you. I am Minette Klenner with Arizona Charter Academy.
And I'm Alexa Pupo with Imagine Prep Surprise.
And we represent the Capital Scholars Program. And the Capital Scholars Program was founded to provide students with a hands-on experience in Arizona lawmaking process. Our students work to create proposals, bills, and amendments to present them in mock sessions. Students this year have worked with the different department heads within the City of Surprise to create proposals for individual departments. Today, our proposals will be representing the Community and Recreation Services, Fire, and Police departments. First, we must begin by saying thank you so much, Mayor Wolcott and council members, for your continued support of our program and for participation in our mock session here today. We owe a huge debt of gratitude to Paul Bernardo for assisting us in so many ways we can't even count with all of the departments and establishing us here today in front of you. Also, for the City of Surprise for providing us our venue that we use every week. We appreciate that. For this presentation, each group will present for 2 to 3 minutes, and then for the sake of us getting through the presentations, we ask that you hold your questions until we are completed with all of the presentations. And at this time, we would like to begin with our first presentation titled Donuts with Police.
Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Daniel Jorfi with Arizona Charter Academy, and today we will be discussing our bill, Donuts with Police.
My name is Elizabeth Zickerfus.
And my name is Samantha Rosales.
We represent a program to develop true trust between youth and law enforcement by bringing both populations together to open a mutual dialogue concerning public relations and the image, therefore, of dealing with the damaged relationship between the police and the youth.
Due to the recent incidents across our nation, people have been losing trust that they once had in police officers. We want to focus on the youth to regain trust. The officers will attend the schools at scheduled time. Donuts will be provided for the officers as they enter school. We want the program to be fun for both the students and the officers. If the officers do not want to volunteer, we want to pay them just like they were at work.
The purpose of this program is to reopen mutual communication between the Surprise youth and law enforcement. The program will promote good relations between guardian and encouraging further cooperation and, to an extent, recruitment. The nation's youth are the most likely to overgeneralize media coverage and build a negative concept of law enforcement. As mentioned before, our goal is for officers to volunteer. Our alternative is to have 2 officers, both male and female, go to each school in Surprise once each school year. There are a total of 27 schools in the Dysart School Unified District and charter schools, which would cost a rough estimate of $2,751.
I'd like to thank the esteemed council members and especially Mayor Sharon Wilcott for listening to our proposal here today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next, we have the City of Surprise Traveling Library.
Good afternoon, Mayor Wilcott, council members. I am Destiny Aiken.
And I'm Emily Holdaway.
To try to gain the rights of the children in Surprise that they deserve to have a selection of books available to them, we created the Surprise Traveling Library.
This is how it works. Donations will be collected at the Maricopa County Library. Volunteers will sort through the books, separating them by age groups. For example, preschool, kindergarten, juvenile, young adult, and genre. Any school can sign up to have the traveling library visit them for 1 week. Volunteers will then deliver the books to the schools. Each school will have an area sectioned off on their campus exclusively for the traveling library. The books will be dropped off and organized by volunteers. A volunteer will be in the traveling library section in the school during school hours. At the end of the week, volunteers will take down the library and move on to the next school who has requested it. Another option would be to create a library in a van or other vehicle. Volunteers will then drive the library to all the schools who have requested it.
This would not only be helpful to the children of Surprise, but will also promote community involvement in today's youth. With volunteers at the schools, the youth of our community will have a chance to talk to the volunteers and connect with one another. This will create positive relationships with the children in Surprise and their community.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have recreational art.
Mayor Wilcott, community members, my name is Micah Hill. This is Destiny Figueroa and Connor Duncan.
Oh, sorry. The bill that we are doing today is called recreational art, and it will help local businesses and other things get kids off the streets and them from vandalizing and helping our businesses.
Our project will range in price depending on whether or not we can get sponsoring. The price will depend on just the size of a small building.
Having a building in which people can go and Surprise and create street art and other recreational activities would gratefully affect the city of Surprise, keeping graffiti in certain areas, and it would also keep vandalizing as a whole down.
We will work through the parks and recreation to help and having to build a building by creating local businesses and publicity.
Mayor Wilcock, thank you for your time and listening to our presentation.
Thank you.
Next, we have recreation and Surprise.
Pull that down so you can, there you go.
Okay.
So we can hear you. That's the most important.
Good afternoon, Mayor Wolcott and council members. My name is Kiara Valdez, and this is Fiona Arid, April Seacosh, and Hannah Millage, and Kaylee Crawford. The purpose of our bill is to provide a leisure center for young teens and families in Surprise.
In our center, we will have indoor sports such as soccer, basketball, batting cages, and volleyball. We will have a rentable multi-purpose room for dance, music, or culinary, a gymnasium, and a workout gym.
This building offers many benefits and opens many opportunities to the general population, such as culinary arts, indoor sports activities, and performing arts. And the city will also benefit financially because you'll have fees to get in and to be a part of those certain activities.
We project this cost to be about $400,000 plus other costs that you could potentially have, such as sewage, plumbing, and other public works.
In addition, the space could be used for an arts rec center. this arts center could offer things such as dance, any performing arts such as theater, and any physical art related, so like digital arts or physical art such as painting and drawing. And classes could be offered which could give students who go to schools that don't necessarily offer arts classes the opportunity to explore and create.
Thank you for your time and your consideration to our bill.
Thank you.
Our next presentation is called CCC Continuous Chest Compressions Across Surprise Schools.
Good evening.
Hello, I'm Glory. This is Julia, Jaden, and Jake, and we are here to talk to you about our bill, which will need assistance from the fire department.
The objective of our bill is to provide continuous chest compression or CCC classes to the students around the Surprise area and Dysart School District.
Our bill would help better the community by providing young adults with the knowledge of CCC, which will potentially help save the lives of those around them. They can take their knowledge home with them and use it in case of emergency.
For example, one of the nights that I was not home, it was my brother and my mom. He was choking and she had to perform CCC on him. And if it was me home instead of my mom, my brother would actually be dead right now. And so I feel like this could help people in my situation.
To conclude, we want to provide CCC classes to students across Surprise and decrease calls about this subject. We hope you consider our bill. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our final presentation is for Fire Service Education Betterment.
Hello, Mayor Wolcott and council members. Thank you. My name is Bailey, and I was looking into making a program for the fire service to create an initiative of more understanding in what the fire service is really about. People come into the fire service, and I feel like there should be an understanding of what the job is, and so maybe providing an education for these firefighters that are going to be going into the career, so and then also just allowing them to join before to make sure that they know what they're doing. This way they are prepared for their job, and we can better create a safer system for our citizens of the Surprise. That's my bill. Thank you.
Thank you.
We would now like to open up for you all to ask questions if you have any. I'm not sure if you want me to bring all the students up, or we could just bring them up if you want to. How do you want to do this?
Let's go by proposal and see if council members have any questions or comments about individual proposals.
All right, so let's go back to the beginning with the Donuts with Police. So if you all could stand up for a moment.
Any questions for this group, council members? How about the next one?
Okay. Next would be the City of Surprise Traveling Library.
I have a question.
Councilwoman Villanueva.
Yes, I have a question. Are you going to get the volunteers to do this, to take the books to different schools, or who's going to be in charge of the volunteers?
The volunteers will be in charge of delivering the books to the schools.
But are you the one that's going to pick the volunteers from as adults or students?
Volunteers will have to be 16 years old to volunteer, 18 to volunteer in the schools, like to supervise the library in the school.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Councilmember Hall.
Thank you, Mayor. Who's going to drive the vans?
For the van option, that would be the volunteers also.
So they'd have to have a driver's license?
Yes.
Okay. So have you thought about adult volunteers?
Yes. Like I said, the minimum would be 16, but there's no maximum you can volunteer.
Yeah. Okay. It's not a bad idea. I mean, all these ideas are good, but it's not a bad idea, really.
Thank you.
And I guess my question, Paul, is have you thought about community outreach for some of these ideas?
Can you elaborate?
I'm asking Paul.
Oh, my bad. Just dropping everything.
Mayor, members of the council, my direct involvement with the Capital Scholars has been more in coordination with them internally with departments and setting up their time to be here for your presentation today. So as far as my direct involvement with the program itself, I'm more than willing to hear what your suggestions are as far as my involvement in the future. But at this point, I wasn't directly involved with the preparation of their bills.
Okay. Well, and just, and maybe I'm jumping ahead, and I don't mean to do that, but there's financial implications with some of these, and some more than others. And I think that the next step ought to be that if we as a council agree, that it ought to go to the community outreach. And I think the applications are close to applying time, aren't they?
Yeah. Correct.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
Do you understand what I'm saying?
Oh, I absolutely understand.
Yeah, and then the tactics maybe get dialed down a little closer, like with this one.
Correct.
I like the traveling library idea. I think it's good. And there's a lot of people that have books that want to donate the books, and if they thought it was going to benefit kids in the schools, it'd be a win-win. Right. So I mean, I like it.
Well, I think we have a lot of good ideas that were presented to you today, and so after today, I'll be more than happy to work with the groups on directing them.
Well, that's my opinion.
For some of those next steps.
Okay. Anyone else? Sure.
Thank you, Mayor. The other thing, I want to go back to the police. Could we have somebody from the police idea?
Donuts with police?
Yeah, donuts for the police.
Fix this real quick.
They went, the kids went through that pretty fast. So I just wanted to, are you talking about having a couple of policemen or women come to the school and share some ideas about how to make the community safer, or what is it? You're trying to build trust, or you're trying to increase trust with the police department, correct? So what's the vehicle? What are you doing here? You bringing the police to the school to communicate with the kids about police work and how they make the city safe and those kind of things? Is that what you're doing?
Yes, for the most part, it would be the police officers coming to the schools in more of a assembly or a workshop format, opening more of a dialogue with the students. As you said, connecting as to what the job entails, what they could do to make the region safer.
Yeah.
More of a workshop or dialogue.
Okay, so just creating more dialogue at the schools and maybe rotating police through different schools, charter schools and the public schools, et cetera. I think that's a great idea. I really do. And I think our police department would be very amenable to doing something like that. They want to build relations with the kids, okay? And at our public high schools, we have, are you familiar with the SRO program? The resource officers that are at the high schools and Surprise the public high schools. And they develop quite a rapport with the kids, but they could also go to the charter schools and talk about safety and how we can together make a city safer, so I think that's a great idea, because we got a great police force here, you guys, and we got a great chief, and I think that's right up their alley. Don't you think they'd love to do that, Mayor?
I do. I do indeed.
I
think that's I think that what's really wonderful about all of the proposals is that it's our youth that are reaching out to the community and trying to engage in every way possible at all levels throughout the departments. And this is all about building a community, and whether it's engaging with our police, and it's a cute name, Donuts with Police, but obviously it goes well beyond Donuts with Police, this proposal. It's clear that making certain, this is something that, you know, for you, Vice Mayor, you missed this part, that clearly they're trying to create that opportunity for dialogue and creating and fostering a more positive working relationship. You know, it's all about understanding what we do for one another, and it's all about service, and we have one of the top police departments in the country that is all about service. And so I really do think that it's a great opportunity for you guys to sit down and work with the police department. And to Councilmember Hall's point, I do believe that the Council Outreach Fund is going to be open for applications here very soon. And so by all means, you know, look at opportunities through the program to see if you can't get one or more of your programs funded.
Absolutely. Right.
Vice Mayor, did you have a question?
First, my apologies for missing the entirety, not just of the Donuts with Police, but the entire presentation. I was a little detained at school. But if I can get a copy of this, I appreciate you guys and the snippets that I've seen so far. Great ideas. There's always great ideas that come out of this program. So if I can get a copy of the PowerPoint, that would be fantastic.
And
Councilwoman Villanueva.
I wanted to ask you, have you been in contact directly with the police department to okay all this? Or is this just an idea?
This is we have run it by them. We have not received any direct indication whether or not it would be possible. This is just strictly proposal at the moment.
If I can just speak on that behalf. We actually held a welcome meeting with all of the department heads. We invited the department heads to come sit with the the students one evening, and they were able to go around and meet with each of the departments and find out what their needs were. So this was brought up in conversation, but all of the department heads that are sitting here tonight are unaware of which departments the students chose and what bills they presented. We kind of wanted to surprise them, so.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So the next program was recreational art. Any questions, council members, on recreational art? Councilmember Hall.
Thank you, Mayor. Again, I think this is a good idea. I'm just trying to figure out how we could incorporate it in one of our city buildings. And what comes to mind, and I don't know if we'd have to really vet this, talk about it, whatever, but I was thinking about an area in the Texcelerator that could be an art area, small area, but dedicated to student art. I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud here, you know, because but I think that art is very important in our city. And you kids have recognized that, and I applaud you for that. Because I'm just, maybe there's a way that we can. I know we've got a couple of schools that are going to display art in City Hall. I think, is it Paradise Honors that's going to? Jim Mecca is Paradise Honors. Is it? Right. Okay, he wants to do it, and then there's some other school that wants to put art in City Hall, student art, and maybe that's a step in the right direction, and maybe we can find a home for student art that people can go look at on a continuing basis. You know, I like the idea, I really do, and we don't want tagging buildings. That's no fun. You know, and that really deteriorates property values and makes people upset, and so if there's a way that we can incorporate art, kids art into our city somehow, you know, I think I don't know what it is exactly. You got an idea, Jim?
Vice Mayor Williams.
Okay, so just some clarification because I missed your presentation. So we're talking about art physically, and when you say tagging, so that was like the light bulb on a building or a wall or something like that, correct? Is that accurate? Okay. This has worked in Phoenix, in Maryville. Specifically, John Nelson was a council member for the city of Phoenix. I had talked to him about this several years ago, where they had an issue with an area that just constantly was getting tagged. It was getting tagged. It was getting tagged. And they created a mural out of it, the community. They identified it and they created a mural out of it, and there was no issues after that. So I think it's brilliant. I think that it's something that we can look at and identify an area, you know, anywhere in the community if there was the need. But good idea. Liked it. Thank you.
I think if we'll all, we don't have to look that far back at, in the original town site, the bathrooms at the park were suffering some problems with tagging, and our community all got together and created a mural around that bathroom, and it has, to my knowledge, it has not been a problem since. So again, it is a program that I think works, and it really is part of showing how art brings people together and gives people a chance to really invest in their community and show pride. So another good program. Councilmember Biondo.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I think both possibilities really have merit. I think it's an excellent idea as well. Looking at possibilities for a place where student art can be placed, as well as, and I think your original intent, as I interpreted it, was to actually have a wall, a building, several walls on which you could actually render your art. And I think the possible idea of even talking with the Techcelerator to see if there's a wall they could designate where that could be done, I think it would be just great. This is also something, it was suggested that we might want to have our Arts Commission take a look at and come up with some suggestions as part. They're in the process of developing an arts master plan on the placement of art throughout City Hall, as well as all the surrounding areas. So it could be something that we may want to refer to the Arts Commission to work out, to have some continuing dialogue about it. And I think they would be enthusiastic about the prospect as well.
Councilwoman Villanueva.
Well, I think because I am from the original town side, and that because we have had that problem for many years, if this is going to happen, I'd like to see it done throughout the city and not just the original town side. Because I know that when that happens, then you have murals in one area, it's always identified as graffiti or identify that we had a problem in that area. So if the art's going to happen, I'd like to see it happen throughout the city, whether it's Maryvale, not Maryvale, sorry. You know, one of the rest of the city to be part of this and not just one specific area. Thank you.
Great point.
Good point.
Councilmember Williams.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, to that point, and this hasn't been as much of an issue as of late, but a lot of the HOAs, when we were going through that downturn, that kind of the broken window theory, it was an issue in terms of tagging on electrical boxes and common area walls. So including HOA boards and management teams when you're identifying locations, not just kind of a designated location, but maybe it's a program that's out there that's a tool for some of these communities to utilize. You as artists to go in there and, okay, this is your canvas, and create something there in communities that in areas of our city pockets that are having that issue. So I think it can serve the larger surprise and not just pockets.
Mayor, could I make a comment?
Councilmember Tandy.
Oh,
thanks. My discussion is going to be a little bit more general. I really like this Capital Scholars Program with all the other things that have been done through the program, plus this. A lot of great ideas here, and that's how I take it is. These are great ideas for the community. But I also want to talk about one other great idea that the council has already acted on, and that is to bring Paul Bernardo in. So to help coordinate some of these great ideas, I think down the road, a lot of these, we actually have the beginnings of some of these in place. So part of what we wanted to do with Paul, I think, is getting the coordination going, getting the communication going, so that when you do have a great idea, how do you plug in, and how do you further making something like that happen? So for the donuts with the police, it's been brought up. We've got the resource officers already at the high schools, but maybe it could be expanded and shared with the charter high schools. Now, right now, my understanding is they're full-time on those high schools, but maybe we can have a presence from time to time for assemblies when that's needed. Traveling library, that actually is in the system, kind of. A lot of people don't know, but you can actually order a library book from any library and have it delivered. But I know this is a slightly enhanced concept, and maybe if that helps get books to people, I think that might be a good idea. Building for art, I'd like everybody to know that we do have some buildings where they can actually participate in art right now. We have the West Valley Arts Center, a museum. We have the WAM, which is volunteer artists working. There's lots of opportunities already, and that, again, come back to, that's the key. If there's interest there, let's communicate our resources, and maybe your interest in some of those can actually be the spark that helps it go one step further. So you don't really necessarily have to start from zero on a lot of these. Some of these might already be partially in place, but they need your help to take it further. Recreation surprise. My best recommendation there is, be aware of the general plan, be familiar with our budget process every year and the capital projects that we discuss. Do we want to go ahead and put some of those things in budget? That's how those things happen. So stay involved with us and be with us. Chest compressions, I know our fire department does, I believe, teaches some of those. Fire service education, we actually have a high school in Dysart District that actually does have a fire service program. So a lot of these already have a great start, but it's good to hear that there's interest. So those programs that are already started, they're on the right track. But I encourage you to join in, see if that program works for you. If not, if you had slightly different idea, try to get them to adopt it. If not, continue on with your programs and try to make them happen.
Great point. Councilmember Hall?
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, good point, Todd. With this art, the other thing is, remember what Wham did with the art mural for the community garden? They actually painted it in the Texcelerator and then placed it. Okay, and that's why your idea, Councilman Biondo, is a good idea in terms of, let's get the Arts Commission involved in this with the master art plan, because they could incorporate the student art into that somehow. It doesn't need to be on a wall wherever. It could be just like Wham did. And didn't they do one for the right across from the stadium also, in the utility building?
They did.
Remember? Yeah. So maybe that approach.
I think to your point, Councilmember, there are as to Councilmember Tandy's point, there are already things that are in place that Capital Scholars Program could start enhancing, things that are already in the works. So there are opportunities that are further along. There are opportunities that are just getting started. But I think the important part is staying engaged, staying involved on all these issues, because you never know. What starts with one small group can someday blossom into a real movement. And that's precisely what this council needs to hear, is that this is important to the community. So whether it's one individual proposal that costs, what was it? I think I heard a $400,000 item versus donuts with cops, considerably different fiscal impact, but nevertheless, they all have a tremendous impact on the community, and more importantly, your feedback has a tremendous impact on us, which is really important. So real quickly, does any council member have any other items that they would like to bring forward on these individual programs? I think we've covered, 3 of them we've asked questions on. What's the next one? Recreation and surprise. This was the facility. Council members have any questions about the students' interest in this item? Councilmember Tandy?
I just reiterate that on this type of thing, every year we talk about recreation projects and the budgets, you know, not only the programs, because the programs have an annual cost, but we also do on a regular basis talk about, do we need another facility or building? And those are lengthy discussions because we have to figure out how to pay for them too. And so if this is something that's interesting to you, I'd recommend coming to those budget hearings or we actually start talking about the budget, I think next month, October, November timeframe. So watch our agenda, come and talk. You know, you get a 3 or 4 minutes section, come and talk to us. Tell it's important as we're building the budget, as we're showing the city manager what's important to us. If you've put a compelling argument together there and it touches one or all of us, and we might say to the city manager, hey, this is a priority of ours. We'd like to see something like this in the budget. And then it becomes all of our concern to figure out how do we pay for it. And then when it gets to that point, it's most likely going to go out to the entire community because some of these things are pretty pricey, and we do need support of the entire community to make some of these things happen. But yeah, I'd encourage you to stay involved. Don't let it drop.
Councilmember Hall.
Thank you, Mayor. In this item here, the rec building, I totally get where you're coming from. I mean, you know, what do you do in Surprise when it's 110, you know, 105? Okay, we get that. And I think, what I think we need to do is, in general, is look at all our city assets, because I think that we have city assets in place right now that we might be able to use for this kind of thing without building a new building. I think we've got some assets in place. It's just a matter of working through how we're going to program it and how we're going to incorporate it. That's, you know, and so this is a big one. This is probably the biggest of all the ideas that we need to think about. But I think we got some assets we can use without building a new building.
Thank you, Councilmember Biondo.
Thank you, Mayor. Councilmember Hall touched on this. Maybe a good starting point would be for the group, in fact, to survey, if you haven't already done so, what are the available programs with the city currently in place at Countryside, Sierra Montana, as well as the overall recreational program, and then identify where the voids are. And I'm sure you'll see some voids along the way, and that might give you then a clear idea of a more precise direction about where you want to go with plugging in those voids where you may see them in the recreational program. So I think a survey of what currently exists, if you haven't already done that.
Thank you. You know, this particular item was actually discussed during our discussions about bonding. And I think to everyone's point, we really need to know what the needs are, whether it's the void or what we already have, or what the needs are in the future. And you know, I think all of us have seen facilities that we think are underutilized. Right. And I think all of us have seen that there are facilities that are at their breaking point. So there are different things that we really do need to look at and try to figure out how we can make something as big as this happen, but we really need to know what we're dreaming about. So you can be on the ground floor of dreaming this dream and helping develop a plan for how we approach that in the future. And I know that Councilmember Tandy during our bonding discussion said, you know, kids have grown up and gone without having access to some of the facilities that we could have had. But that's why kids like you who step forward and say, this is something that we think is important, guess what? It takes a long time getting going. So your input at the ground floor is really critical to make something like this happen. So again, an opportunity for the Capital Scholars Program to have a real impact on growing facilities and amenities that make a community really spectacular. Again, it's something that you're bringing forward to us, and we appreciate that. But we really need to know more about what it is what you dream, because we can draw pretty pictures and we can throw out numbers like 400,000, but we really don't know what that means. And so we need to know more about what your thoughts are, and encourage you to, as Council says, be a part of the budget discussion. Come here and talk. We always encourage people to speak to us about developing our budget, developing our capital improvement programs. We always encourage that. So I applaud you for bringing something. This is pretty visionary, and so I applaud you for bringing something forward like that. So thank you. Any other questions? Councilwoman Villanueva.
I just have a comment. I think all the students that are here today are leaders in your schools. I encourage you to talk to the ones that are not leaders, that are just going to school and going home, and get them involved, or even just give them your ideas of what they can do, because they also need that. So since all of you are leaders, work with the other students in your schools. Okay? Thank you.
Great. Thank you, ladies. Thank you.
The next group was the continuous chest compressions.
This is right up your alley, Vice Mayor. Did you have any questions about this particular program? I know you missed it, but maybe
Put me
they...
on the spot. I'm nervous.
Any questions, members, on this item? Councilmember Hall?
Thank you, Mayor. I think, again, like Councilman Tanny was pointing out, we do have a pretty good education program in our fire department. Maybe we just need to do a better job, all of us, in communicating that to the charter schools, that Renee Hamlin usually has these classes on chest compression. I took one of her classes. It was great. And to your point, young lady, that has to be a very, to think about your brother, maybe losing your brother, boy, that's a huge motivator. And so maybe we can do some kind of outreach in terms of education, what Renee's doing, because we do it here at the city in the public safety building, in the auditorium. It's a great place to learn. And so that's what I would recommend, is we do better outreach, because we got the program in place. We just need to include you guys in it. Yeah. You know.
Councilmember Villanueva.
Yes, I just want to say, all the students that are here, you should encourage them, because you are leaders. You should encourage them to go ahead and take the program. It would help all of you. And look at how many we would have already. It
could save a life.
Right, and help other students get involved. But you have a group here that, you have quite a few that could go ahead and take the program.
Yeah. We did talk to our principal, and he said that he would be up for having this class, so he had us do a petition, and we actually got up to like 40 signatures just within the first day. That was only in an hour, so we could get enough signatures for our school, because our principal is definitely interested in a class for it.
And our school would be willing to kind of test this program out and see how it runs, because we definitely do think we have enough students who are interested in doing something like this.
Good, super, great, thank you.
Councilmember Tandy.
Thanks. I like the idea of having all kinds of opportunities available for those in high school. I know my daughter actually took one of these classes when she was in high school, and I just got to see her married off this Saturday, and this actually sparked an interest in her career. She's actually works in an emergency room as a physician's assistant, so you never know what spark's going to get somebody going in that direction, but all of these ideas could lead to your eventual career and your passion of your life, of what you want to do. So that's why I like hearing all these different ideas, and you just never know which one's going to take, and that's where you're going to go, and you're going to love doing it.
Vice Mayor? Are you prepared?
Thank you. I'm playing catch up. Sorry, my apologies, guys. This is good stuff. And certainly CPR training has come a long way with continuous chest compressions, and that originated in Arizona, I believe. There were firefighters in Tucson. He's shaking his head. Yes, I know my CPR history. So, so good. How? And here's a question for you. How do you? And you alluded to your principal being supportive. So how do you? This is a challenge for me in my previous profession as an athletic trainer. This, safety and security on the athletic field is something paramount, and sometimes it's a challenge just to get our coaches to sign up and get trained for these types of things. So how do you market that? Because I think it's a brilliant idea, and CCC is so simple. It's like it goes back to the stop, drop, and roll. Everybody knows that. Stop, drop, and roll. Everybody knows just don't worry about breathing. Just go. And so it's. There you go. Start singing, get your beat, maybe put your iPod on and just start playing something and staying alive. Yeah, brilliant. So how do you market that to get the masses trained? How do you do that?
Like, to spark an interest in it?
Yeah, it's just if you're looking citywide and there's 125,000 people, and I think focusing in on the schools is obviously because my kids come home and they teach me stuff. My son came home the other day and told me all about Roberto Clemente. He's 9 years old. And they learn about that stuff in school, which is awesome. So how do you, it's a good starting point, but how do you spark that interest? How do you market that and get the masses signed up and trained?
Well, a lot of teenagers nowadays, they're looking for jobs, and like primarily you go to babysitting.
Yeah.
And if someone was going to trust you with their child, they would put more trust in you if you were certified for this. So that could help. And
yeah, and especially since there's different types of CCC or CPR for younger children, and there's different
pregnant women.
There's different way that you have to perform this, and we think that if students have the knowledge of CCC, that it would spark a better interest in parents and whoever else entrusting their children with this teenager, or just jobs in general too. So.
Super.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate it. I think it's a brilliant idea, and I think everybody needs to know how to do this. So I think, is this? I mean, we're talking about bills, right? Or is this would be a bill? So would we mandate?
We would want it to be kind of mandatory for high school students, not middle school students, but high school students to learn it, and they could do it for a semester, and they could earn a half credit, which could go towards extracurricular activities. That way, it can go.
That's
so
make a graduation requirement.
Great.
Take it to the Arizona Board of Education.
It is figured we would start off with the city and then expand bigger and bigger if
Very
it works
good.
out.
And it's kind of like an incentive since you earn something, so it's kind of oh,
Don't
yeah,
want to
if
do
I'm
it.
if I'm gonna do it, yeah.
Right.
Maybe
Thank you, guys.
Maybe we can get this on our legislative agenda. I like that very much. Next one.
Our last one is the fire service education betterment.
And I know just because you're alone doesn't mean that you're the only one that's interested in this. So, council members, did you have any questions about what Bailey is talking about here? No? Councilmember Hall.
So how do you see that happening? How would it work? Would the fire department come to the school? Or
I was looking more into AP classes. So, for example, the EMS classes that you would take.
Could you speak into the microphone?
Sorry. So, AP classes for college, you have to take your EMS classes and the prerequisites in order to get into fire science 1 and 2. So, possibly getting something in place to where you could take those classes as a high school student.
I see. Interesting.
With all the JTED training and that goes on in our high schools, one would think that this would be an opportunity to add on, to work in trying to prepare those young people who might be interested in fire services. So that's something to consider too, is what if the JTED programming might be available through WestMec for training.
Exactly.
That might be a real interesting approach as well. So, good job for identifying this as an opportunity. You know, several of you have identified things that actually could lead to jobs and future occupations. So, good job. Councilmember Hall.
No, I'm done.
Councilmember Biondo.
Thank you, Mayor. Have we had, and this is probably more a question for the fire chief or someone who may know on the council, have we had anything like a student intern program within the fire department? You know how we have our student interns who come into the various departments and really get exposed to the workings of the various departments? I don't know whether we have something akin to that within the fire medical or not. A summer youth intern program? Something we may want to discuss at another time, to the extent it may or may not exist. That would be another avenue to actually intern side by side. You get a real feel of what goes on in the department.
We have the Explorer program, right, Mayor? We have the
Yes, we
Explorer
do.
program in the police, but I don't know if we have a comparable in the fire. I don't think, but
something we might look at.
Absolutely. So I think in general, you've sparked the real interest of the council in talking about a variety of different ways that you can interface with the community, with our departments, and perhaps things that might springboard into something even beyond even the city. But you know, working with WestMec, working with WAM, working with our local arts community, there's just a number of ways that you can connect. And the one thing that I know for sure is if there's one person that can help you connect, you've already been working with him, and that's Paul. So I think you've heard the feedback that we've been giving, and it's a great opportunity, I think, for you to help these participants in this program see if they can't find ways to move their proposals forward.
Absolutely, and actually Paul has already agreed to a meeting in November, so we're very excited. Thank you so much, Mayor Wolcott and council members. You just have made this program so successful with your support, and Mrs. Neal and I appreciate everything that you've done for us, and so do our students. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you all for participating this evening, and thanks for giving us so much of your time. I do appreciate that. The next item on the agenda.
Item 2 is the city's 2016 state legislative agenda.
Good evening, Mayor Wolcott, members of the council. The intent for tonight is to provide an initial overview and discuss sort of some of the general guiding principles for the city's state legislative agenda for the current fiscal year, moving into the legislative session coming this spring. So the intent of sort of setting the framework for all of this is really this opportunity that we have uniquely to blend the immediate with some of the longer term strategy. And so this isn't always possible, but when it is, it's a beautiful thing, and it's actually pretty exciting for where we're at. So the foundation of the way that we're approaching our legislative agenda this year is truly from a partnership perspective. We'll get into that a little bit. But again, the intent of tonight's conversation is really to set the stage for the strategic deployment of your staff resources in the fall to best position us for success navigating the conversations that will come in the legislative session. So the approach this year, it's been exciting to come to Surprise and really get to know the team that we have, both at the leadership level from the council standpoint and certainly from your executive management team, and really all the way through the boots on the ground folks that we have here in Surprise. It's sort of the dream team ideal situation from a legislative perspective, because you have a number of really integrated staff members, team members for you to help integrate us into the conversations of which we need to be a part this fall, and truthfully ongoing into the future. We are stronger through our partners, and so that's where your staff has really done an exceptional job of positioning us for success as a city by being where we need to be, being on the right teams, and being engaged in the right conversations. So that partnership approach, both from the local level through the regional, through city, county, state, and even onto the federal level, you have a team of individuals who are making sure that they are monitoring those conversations in their industry areas of expertise, as well as on the regional level. And that is what's really gaining us kind of a higher profile regionally and in the state. As we have conversations, they're saying, man, Surprise is at everything. Man, Surprise is always at the table. Surprise is really doing great things. The more that we position ourselves to be the city that's called to the table when they engage and convene a conversation, the better positioned we're going to be for success in advancing our local legislative agenda. So the idea is to be proactive and engaged. As I've done sort of an initial roadshow, meeting with our state legislator, our representative delegation, has really been to push this message of us being a proactive, engaged community, one that's a resource base for our legislators as well as for our partners, so that again, when they need something, the first thought is, we'll call Surprise in and see what they've got going on over there, and that keeps us engaged and actively part of those conversations. And then really to be responsive to the needs, not just of our legislators, but certainly of our partners as well. And again, the more that you're a resource, the more that you become integrated into that, the easier it is to be in the right conversation, to be influential when the time is right. So when we look at our state legislative agenda, there's really kind of three components, if you will. The primary guiding principles, which have been a core part of Surprise's legislative agenda, protecting shared revenues, opposing unfunded mandates, and then preserving local authority. The secondary component of the agenda, which we'll get into a little bit, will be much higher level tonight. It will hone in and get a little bit more specific as we get closer to the actual session. And those are our key specific local issues that will start to surface in the next couple months. There's some we know today. There's some that will come up the next couple months, and then hooray, wait for session. There will be a lot that come up during session that we'll just be ready to respond to appropriately. And then the third component is the league resolutions, and so I'll be walking through a very brief overview of those this evening. As we've had these conversations with the legislators and also with our partners, both locally and on a statewide level, there's three components of the message that have really resonated, and that's the partnership approach, that's the proactive approach that we're taking and going out to our partners and asking them what they need, how we can be supportive, and then the third component is really being that resource base that if they do need a participant on a committee, if they do need information or simply just support in another manner, that we are the city that they look to provide that. With that, a very brief overview of kind of key issues that we'll be keeping an eye on. Economic development is always a core issue, not just for Surprise, but for most municipalities across Arizona. We are uniquely positioned this year with the conversation that has been occurring regarding the Economic Development Reimbursement Authority, the EDRA proposal. That's been an update for the council before. We'll bring that forward as it continues to be vetted and sort of evolved through the legislative process. Land use planning is always a core issue. That's something we'll be keeping an eye on. Water, particularly relative to the funding for our agencies that help manage this. So both, kind of our local issues of how are we managing our portfolio and what are the needs and how do we manage those resources and what's that interplay of funding for those resources, but also on that statewide level, how can we be supportive for the agencies that really manage that on a larger level. Military preservation, obviously Luke is a key partner for us. The issues that typically surround the encroachment on military bases, we'll be keeping an eye on those. That's one that's been kind of floating around in some of the conversations recently. Public safety, obviously continuous chest compressions could come up as part of the conversation, so we'll keep an eye out for that and look for how we can be supportive if it arises. But we had some of this last year, the conversation regarding the public safety personnel retirement system reform that started to bubble up. That's really going to take a key component of the legislative focus this year, so we'll be integrated in those conversations. I will say for our public safety staff, as well as for our executive management staff, and certainly with our finance staff, we have people on each of those three areas that are really well integrated in those conversations. So Chief Young is a primary legislative liaison for the Arizona Chiefs of Police Association. You have Chief Abbott and his team who are also integrated and monitoring those conversations, and not just monitoring, but actively participating in them, which is to our benefit. And then finally, Lindsay Duncan is actually on the board for the government finance officers of the state of Arizona. And so she's one of the key voices in the financial angle group that's participating in that conversation. Education funding, as we've been hearing, is likely to be the predominant focus of the session. There's always conversations about whether or not they're going to call a special session this fall. That we'll wait and see and react when that happens, if it happens. But we did have a bit of a win this week. There was a lot of consternation following last year's legislative session regarding the funding for JTEDs. And there was a very last minute insertion of a provision in the budget that actually very, very significantly negatively impacted the funding. And I know Mayor and Vice Mayor, we were doing some last minute, late night, early morning communication to some of our team regarding that. The mayor and I were in a West Valley Caucus legislative agenda planning meeting the other day, and there was much support for restoring JTED funding and making sure that it's preserved moving forward. So that's a huge win. WestMec is a major partner for us, so that's something that we'll be making sure that we're supportive of WestMec and the other JTEDs, is that's a really great opportunity for us. Transportation, state shared revenues in the census, again, more in the monitoring sense on those right now. The 303 has been transformational for Surprise. The 101 is still really developing. So always keeping an eye on those conversations that will position us well for future success, as well as success in the current time. I'm going to skip through the league resolutions very briefly. They're on the screen in front of you. Essentially what happened at the League of Arizona Cities and Towns conference a couple weeks ago, the league executive committee, actually the league, all of the mayors voted on, and excuse me, not just the mayors, but the representatives from all of the communities that are represented in the League of Arizona Cities and Towns, voted on a number of resolutions that would formulate the primary legislative platform for the league moving forward. So there's a number of economic development proposals. EDRA was one of them. The Renewable Energy and Conservation Financing Districts is another one. Some of these will have greater effects and benefits for Surprise specifically, and some of them are going to be a little bit more tailored to other communities that might have a different financial outlook than we do. But overall, they're something that we'll be able to give you more information on as they advance. The steps from here is that they actually move into legislative format, so you'll begin to see language, who's supportive. We'll have a better idea of whether or not they'll be successful and who's plugging into those conversations. This is sort of just the second set of overview. You'll see the improving the FAA communication with municipalities, stopping the highway user revenue fund sweeps, restoring them to 2008 levels. Some of these are ones that you've seen before. Yeah. So some of these will be familiar, but again, they all key back into some of our primary legislative overviews. So again, next steps, continuing to work on those partnerships, and when we do this is truly a team effort. I cannot say enough about our staff and how well they've already been integrated. When I came into a really great network, and they've really gotten excited about this, and we're getting some really good buzz among our partners for how we're approaching this. And then, really looking at the engagement level, staying in those conversations. We have our legislative breakfast coming up on October 29th. And that will be a good opportunity with our legislative delegation to really tell our story and make sure that as our representatives, they know the fantastic things that are going on here, and even from the position of what an economic driver our city is for our state. And so, the idea that strong cities make strong states. And really making sure that they're armed with our information, and then again, that they really truly understand how we can be a resource for them, and that finally that they are looking to us as one of the cities that they'd like to talk to when they're mulling over a proposition. So that idea of being present. Later in the fall, we'll look at the actual formal adoption of the legislative agenda, so we'll give some of these ideas and conversations time to percolate, bring that back for the formal adoption, and then be keeping you informed with regular updates as we move into session. So with that, I'll...
Thank you, Nicole. And I'm glad we're working to, that we actually have the legislative breakfast already scheduled, which is great. And I know that our delegation really does appreciate that format. I also know that they kind of appreciate coming here. So if we could do a follow-up, and once we get closer to session, so that they truly feel like they're a partner, if we could bring them back to talk to us, at either in a workshop, and probably in a workshop environment is best, just to see how we can help them further some of their initiatives, because as we talked with a group of them the other day, they really are focusing more, I think, on issues that are helping the West Valley. And we have this West Valley caucus that's really starting to gel, and I think it's important that we make certain that they feel like they're partners of ours. So the legislative breakfast is great, but then giving them that opportunity to come here and work directly with the council in a more formal setting, I think is a good opportunity as well. Well done. Thanks for putting this together. Really appreciate that. Councilmember Hall.
Thank you, Mayor. Good job on this. The one area where I think we need more linkage when you talk about partnership is all the people that can affect our residents directly. And who I'm talking about is APS, Southwest Gas, Waste Management, the county, in some ways Luke, not so much, Dysart School District. I think we need much more heads up with what they're working on. For instance, I don't know anything, I don't know what the latest is on EPCOR and the East Surprise rate hike with ACC, but I'd like to know, okay? That's an example. I think we need to get ahead of anybody that can impact our residents in some way, either through utility rates, transportation, trash, recycling, what's that? Education. Yeah, and education. So that, I think the legislative part, you're really on it. The mayor's totally correct. And I really like the fact that, and it was through her initiative, we set up the legislative breakfast last year, and I thought it was pretty successful. I mean, you know, all the legislators showed up, they got some good feedback from us, and I think it impacted them. So I think that's really, but I'm talking about outside, the state legislators can impact our lives, believe me, I understand that, but a lot of these other organizations can too, and I think we need to be, or CAP is another one, CAP. You know, we just need to be really involved with these people, and maybe it comes through, I don't know if that, maybe I'm off base, but I would see you as being kind of the nexus of, or where all the information flows.
Absolutely, Mayor Wolcott, Councilmember Hall. The approach that has been successful so far, it is really not so much based on me, but based on the individuals that are out there working in those industries. And so you have, we've experienced a number of wins. Dysart predominantly our integration with some of their events and activities that they've got going on. I knew I was going to forget it as soon as I started talking. Oh, Southwest Gas was one that I think we had spoken about previously in terms of we now coordinate our annual capital improvement plan with their annual maintenance plans. So it really just staying integrated on that level. That's occurring staff to staff, and they're gracious enough to keep me in the loop with what the good work that they're doing. But it is garnering, when I say raising the profile, that's what I mean. They really see us as someone like, oh, we need to make sure Surprise is at the table. So CAP, we're organizing with our director, Terry Lowe, and also with the portfolio manager, Fred Stevens. We have an upcoming meeting with CAP to go out and talk to them about just generally, you know, ideas, planning, what's coming up, how can we be involved, so that if there is an opportunity, that we're one of the ones they call to the table. And that truthfully is happening across all of the departments. So we look forward to bringing more of those updates coming back. I have regular meetings with APS that are just getting started. We now attend all of the Chamber Government Affairs Committee meetings, which is good to be integrated into that conversation. They bring in other partners. So it's really that strategic, when I say strategic deployment of who do we need to have in the right conversation, and then how do we trickle that information back so that we look for those connection opportunities to make us stronger and our partners stronger through kind of putting those little puzzle pieces together.
It's just, and I know that, I cite a couple of examples of pain that all of us felt. One is the APS sighting. We should have known about that before, way before that happened.
I would like to point out I was not on staff at that point.
I know you weren't.
I'm just kidding.
No, that's not.
I'm just kidding.
I'm just pointing out
Just to make it
examples
clear.
of where all of a sudden we're behind the power curve, and we didn't realize what was happening. EPCOR rate hike was another one. So I mean, me personally, I don't want to be behind the power curve. I want to be in front, knowing what's happening. So when it comes about, we can articulate a position. We can.
Yep.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Anyway.
And to that point, on the APS thing in particular, that's something that actually this council wasn't even in place when there was a discussion about those lines. And so that's why it's important, because this body changes all the time. And so because there is no institutional memory in some cases of items that have occurred a long time ago, it's really critical that we stay constantly in touch with things that are moving along. You know, the legislative thing is an obvious one, because the legislature changes every two to 4 years, or you're seeing another change in the legislature. There's always emerging issues, but again, there's always the perennial issues. But all of these issues that are outside of the legislative purview, specifically in our service provider partners, are things that are ongoing, and they take a lot of time. And so, you know, I think Councilmember Hall and I have been involved in a couple of transportation meetings of late that really started discussions long before he and I were ever even a blip on the radar screen. But moving forward, we need to make certain that we're keeping some continuity in messaging and what the position was, and also making certain that the realities on the ground actually match where the position was 10 years ago. Because what might have been acceptable 10 years ago in terms of the location of lines along Cactus Road obviously became something that was not an acceptable position. So we need to be more in the loop and making certain that we're not caught off guard by positions that were taken by our predecessors, and we certainly don't want to leave that legacy for our future colleagues and future people who take our place. Right. So a great point. Councilmember Biondo.
Thank you, Mayor. About the league resolutions, once they're transferred into legislative language and then introduced, who leads them through the process? Does the league, or do we have an individual role with our individual resolution that was approved?
Yes to both. So typically, depending on what the piece of legislation is, depending on who they find to sponsor it, will kind of guide how that goes. So in our case, because we do have a specific component of that, we actually have a meeting coming up to discuss legislative strategy. Okay. So that'll be a joint initiative between the league to make sure that we're using their resources, okay, their horsepower, as well as using our horsepower and our resources as well. So it's a joint effort on that one.
Great, as long as there is obviously that joint effort, so that we're not stepping over each other or around each other.
Councilmember Tandy.
Thanks. I like, on this slide right here, I like the foundation you're laying. I think it's important to be engaged, to be at the table. I really like the fact that you are talking about being the resource and making us part of the resources, because then the next step is then maybe we can provide some of the leadership as well if we're good partners. So again, emphasizing partners is also critical. I do this based on the experience I had working with another state legislature, and these are all very important things to be more effective down the road, and it takes a while to build that up and be at that point. So I do encourage you to build that strong foundation. I like the ideas of getting additional information, and you know, you're basically a source of how all the data comes together, the information. But I also look forward to, as the foundation gets stronger, to being able to, even though, say, education, for example, we're not the lead agency on that, but it impacts us. So while DICERT will be the lead agency in this city for public education, I think from a partnership and leadership role, we can kind of try to influence and say, hey, at least these things are important from a city's perspective. would the legislative delegation consider some of them? And then we talked about some of those. I know the vice mayor brought up some of those last year at the breakfast. I still think those are important issues, but some of the delegates, our delegation, are saying it might be a few years before some of those things can be in place, but I'm going to hold them to that. I want to keep on asking, because some of these things, I'll explain it. You know, I think there's certain things that impact growth communities differently than communities that are, you know, slowing down or in decline. And for us to be effective, you know, school funding formulas, for instance, could be a little bit different. To not penalize a growth community and not give you funding for students until a year after they're here already, because you got to pay for them now this year. The funding formula I'm using as an example, on the 100th day we take attendance, and that's how much funding you get the following year. Those are things that impact not only the school district in trying to manage, and you know, I let them lead on that effort, but it impacts the community in such a big way in trying to do economic development and attracting employers here, because it's not just strapping the school district, it's strapping the entire community. So those are the types of things. I encourage you to continue the partnerships. You know, let's get everybody working together, build that foundation, get them to look towards us for resources and leadership. And then as that trust builds, and I think we've got lots of opportunities in the years to come to be able to be very effective with the state legislature and the delegation especially.
And Mayor Wolcott, Councilmember Tandy, that's actually a perfect example of where we have integrated staff appropriately. Westmark, as an economic development organization, has been a lead convener of the conversation on education, funding reform, education support in the state, and so we've been incredibly plugged into those conversations. And a large portion, quite honestly, of our inclusion in those conversations came from effective relationships that we had prior because of our economic development team and the work that we're doing on that front. So that's a perfect example of this kind of cross-integration where our involvement in the right organization from an economic development perspective is actually helping us be a support to our school partners in a completely different conversation.
Vice Mayor Williams.
Just in terms of and as my colleagues up here having that discussion on the community stakeholder, the importance of staying engaged. When we talk about line sighting or those issues, those are long-term issues, as Mayor alluded to. That was something that was before all of our time, but it's something we should have been aware of. And that falls on my lap, that falls on anybody that's involved with the city or APS or the residents that live in that community. But my thought in terms of what Councilmember Hall was alluding to in staying connected with those plans and staying connected with the plans of our services is doing something similar to that legislative breakfast. It could be in a council work session, but less formally is a stakeholder breakfast where, you know, and just identify one, you wouldn't have APS and EPCOR at the same table, but a stakeholder breakfast with APS and them laying out their 12 month to 3 year plan, and this is what's going on in Surprise. And that really gives us a heads up in the long term. And it's a casual conversation, and it's something that it's an opportunity for us to ask questions similar to that format of that legislative breakfast. And it's helpful to us because I don't know what questions to ask if I don't know what's going on. So, you know, periodically we get that formally on the dais when things come up and we have to vote on stuff. But that might be a way of taking, not only educating us, but also building those partnerships. And the indirect impact is when we look at things like education that are important to everybody, now we have stronger partnerships because we've been establishing this relationship over time. So just something to consider, just to kind of formalize that with, hey, we're gonna have breakfast in the morning with this group and then this group and then this group. And once a year, I mean, doing that might go a long way for us and for them.
Mayor Wolcott, Vice Mayor Williams, one of the discussions that we've been having with staff is how do you really institutionalize the procedures? Because that's where you get, once it becomes regular and just part of our business annually, to either do that, to meet on a staff level regularly, whether it's quarterly updates, that even as there's staff turnover, as there's council turnover, we've actually institutionalized the relationship and the functionality of that. And that's really the key to the long-term success of how you stay integrated and stay ahead of some of these issues. So those are great suggestions.
Great discussion, council members. This has really, I think, been very helpful, and I like the idea of the breakfast with our stakeholder partners, because quite frankly, we get those at the league usually, but not all of us get to the league all the time. And I think it's important to have an opportunity for all of us to actually be sitting down with the partners, and I think that's a really great suggestion, Vice Mayor. Really great. All right. Thank you so much. Next item.
General Plan 2035 Major Amendment. The presentation will focus on the land use element, the foundation piece for this major general plan amendment.
Good evening.
Yes, Mayor and members of the council. I'm just going to make a brief introduction. This is Joshua Mike in our planning department. He started with the city in March and immediately jumped into this project. So he's going to go ahead and open it up for the presentation. Thank you.
Good evening, Joshua. Welcome.
Good evening. Thank you. The reason I'm here today is to give you an update on the major amendment to the general plan. This amendment will move us away from the village plans and focus on developing more holistic surprise, giving us a guiding policy towards a one surprise focus. In April of this year, the 2 land use planning approaches were developed and presented to the residents, stakeholders, the Planning and Zoning Commission, and to City Council. Input was weighed through the comments and through visual surveys. Discussions resulted in directions guiding us towards the character area planning approach. Today's presentation by our consultant will discuss the new land use element. It is the foundation piece for this major amendment. There will be changes to other elements throughout the general plan in order to create a consistent general plan policy document. The revised language and the updated maps will support the character area planning approach. The packet you have today is an excerpt of some key components from the draft land use element and an illustration of the proposed character area map. It shows examples of the introductions to the character areas and the developments types that define them. The project scope that's on the screen today listed are the elements that have been developed and revised by our consultant. Other elements will be revised by the staff within their different city departments, and all of the elements will be available and distributed on Friday at the beginning of our 60-day review period, starting with for the state requirement. At this point, I'm going to be turning it over to our consultant. There he is. To provide further description of the revised land use element and the proposed character area approach.
Good evening.
Thank you, Josh. Matt Kleisico with Michael Baker. Josh kind of gave I know we're pressed up against time here, so I apologize if I'm going to kind of go a little expeditiously through some of these slides. But I'd like to leave some time at the end for some discussion and dialogue. So I, again, apologize if it goes a little quickly here. But as Josh gave the introduction to this, tonight we're touching about 7 elements of what I think are 22 elements in the general plan. But tonight really is focusing on the land use element itself. And that's because that's what the hub of everything in the general plan kind of works off of is that land use element. So we really wanted to discuss that with you tonight and make sure you're comfortable with that approach as we move forward. And then all the other elements kind of play off of that. So to begin with, this hopefully looks very familiar to you. It was way back, I think, in April when we were last in front of you. And we've been obviously working very diligently with staff since that time to move this land use discussion forward. So what you have on the screen here is a picture of your existing general plan. It's a very traditional land use plan. It has several very specific land use descriptions, and those are placed onto the surprise planning area map in a very prescriptive way. It's very definitive of where certain land uses can go. And so in many ways, it is taking a very, it's looking into the crystal ball of where should these land uses go, and trying to be very detailed about what land use should go in what area. What we started to discuss with you in our last meeting was going towards the character area approach, which Josh introduced. So on your right side, you have what is the proposed current character area map. And you can see that it's a little more simpler in land use context, and a little more simpler in terms of the number of, I know it's a small map there, we'll get to a larger one in a few slides, but in essence there's a simplified approach. And what does that simplified approach mean? So again, this slide might be familiar to some of you. It's a slide we showed in our last presentation, but we wanted to revisit it as a refresher because we think it really helps clarify this character area approach again. And so again, the character area approach is a modern planning term that's being utilized by other communities in Maricopa County, as well as Arizona and the nation as a whole. As I mentioned, it focuses on having fewer and broader land use categories that, again, lump areas into the character or the feel of what you're trying to achieve, rather than working from the bottom up, whereas you're being very definitive on these are the land uses and these are where they go. We're working from the top down and saying this is what we want the area to look like. You as the development community or the property owner, you come to us and discuss your project, and we can work with you within those parameters and get the character that we want, rather than trying to say, nope, this is where you're going to put that land use type. So if we were to graphically convey that, on the right-hand side, you see a conventional land use approach. So this is an exhibit of what the current land use plan is like. And essentially, let's say this is a hypothetical traditional neighborhood community. We all acknowledge that it has specific elements that go into that design. We're going to have a commercial shopping center, grocery store on the corner. We're going to have some high density next to that, maybe some medium density land uses to the south of that, and some low density to round out the development. But we're not always able to look into that crystal ball and know exactly where and in what time those land uses are appropriate. So the character area approach looks at it from a different vantage point and says, maybe commercial can happen here, or maybe commercial can happen down in this corner. Maybe commercial should go over here because it's responding to another commercial development across the street. And we can surround that with some smaller lot residential. And then we can put in a school and park to incorporate that into the lower density. Or perhaps we want a large lot residential component that then can play off of a school site with some small lot residential and a commercial component next to that. So in essence, what we're trying to convey is this really provides that flexibility at the general plan level, that's the 30,000 foot level, to really be more open to development as it comes in. But we understand that there's still a need to have some control over that manner in which that development pattern comes in. So how did we apply that to Surprise? So we
if I may, just real quick, I see Councilmember Hall has a question.
Yes.
Yes, thank you. back to that other slide. So really, if I'm coming into the city of Surprise, and I'm looking, number one, I want things to work out well. I don't want to be a bad developer. I want to be a good one.
Sure.
Okay? So if I come into the city of Surprise and I look at the general plan, I want to comply with the general plan.
Right.
Right?
Right.
That's number one. And number two, I want to make sure that the uses are appropriate in terms of marketability, et cetera, right? So I come in and I see this yellow piece. Yeah, say it's 100 acres. I don't know, pick a number. Then I come into you and I tell you how I'm gonna design this 100 acres. I'm gonna put a small commercial center in the center, and I'm gonna build houses around it. And then, I mean, what point of certainty do I have that I'm even on the same page as you? Do I have a preliminary meeting with the city? Is that the way this works? I have a preliminary meeting and I say, this is what I'd like to do, kind of on the back of an envelope, and then you give me direction from there?
Councilmember Hall, excellent point. If we can just maybe flip through just a couple more slides, I think that'll certainly address your question, because that's right, getting down to it, right? We all can see the merits of a character area approach and having that flexibility, but we really need to understand how do we, in essence, implement that and make sure there's some checks and balances. So the character area approach in Surprise is unique in the sense that we established 4 character areas. We have neighborhoods, which are your traditional, where the residential development occurs, where you have your everyday commercial services. We have your commerce and office, which are, you can look at your activity nodes. You're going to have higher intensity uses there. You're going to have regional commercial, some mixed use development, variations in land use in that commerce and office. Then you're going to have your employment character areas. And those areas obviously are those are our job hubs. Those are those areas where we're going to reach that housing to employment balance that we desire in Surprise. And then, of course, we still have our open space areas that have grown on this character area plan, are important to the well-being and long-term vision of Surprise. So these are the 4 legs of the stool, if you will, of the approach to the character area idea for Surprise. Now, back to Councilmember Hall's point is that that's great, but how are we going to manage that? And so, Josh, if we can, we, under those character areas, have established a level of development types. These development types help to define what are the clearly developments that can occur in these character areas and make a community. So if you look at this graphic kind of exemplifies how you can have many different development types that come together to create that character area. That character area then comes together to create that community. And it's that progression that we're essentially trying to achieve. So, Josh, the next slide. This really breaks it down in a quick, concise way. You have your neighborhood areas, but within neighborhood, under that category, you have a rural neighborhood type, a suburban neighborhood type, and an urban neighborhood type. Similarly, under commerce and office, you have mixed-use residential, you have mixed-use commercial, regional commercial, commercial office. And under employment, you have business park and industrial development types. So those, if you look at it from a very simplistic way, you have basically your menu is your character areas. And then, well, your development types are your menu items. Once you pick your development type, you then go into your specific parameters within each rural development area. So what we did is rolled the design guideline element into these development types so that we can prescribe and make sure that these development areas are in line with what we want in order to create a specific development pattern that is compatible with the general areas within Surprise as a whole. So what you see here under the rural development type as an example is that it's a 0 to 2 dwelling unit per acre area. It's typically large lot single family, but you're also allowed agricultural and neighborhood commercial uses along with civic uses. So under this category, we have a series of development guidelines, and we can't go through all 60 pages of the land use element today, but these few bullet points on the right-hand side are a quick synopsis, if you will, of how we're trying to clarify what specific development character can happen in these areas. So if a developer were to come forward and say, I want to develop a 1 dwelling unit per acre development, they would fall under the rural development type, and then staff would speak with them and instruct them that they have to adhere to the design guidelines outlined within that development type.
Councilmember Hall.
Thank you, Mayor. Just real quick, how does this intersect with what's called form-based code?
So
and can we? I mean, there's some areas where, you know, it's housing and and there's some areas of the city that are probably going to be mixed use.
Right.
Okay, they're going to be different kinds of things, retail with housing above it. Who knows? Okay, but are we going to be able to control the architectural feel of those kind of critical buildings where we've got that mixed use? Are we going to be able to do that with this kind of approach?
The short answer is yes. There's a couple ways to look at this. First, again, this is the general plan, so we're looking at it at a high level.
Right.
So the form-based code is really a zoning term that really looks at it at a more of a 10,000 square foot level.
Make sure that they mesh.
Right.
So
did you? Okay. So we want to ensure that those two elements mesh, and so this approach still maintains the ability to do a form-based code type of approach if staff felt the need to do that at the zoning level, because it allows that flexibility of land uses within each character area.
Okay.
But what is important to understand is that the form-based code discussion is rolled into this at this development type level. So these design guidelines are really what's ensuring that that form-based code idea can still be.
What we're sensitive to, I think all of us on the city council, is we grew so darn fast. There were some things that got built that maybe they wouldn't get built now the way they look. And I remember I was on the Planning and Zoning Commission when we did the SAMs, and we actually, as a Planning and Zoning Commission, told Sam's people how we wanted the building to look rather than a big box. Okay, and so all those architectural little pop-outs and all, the Planning and Zoning Commission put that in the stipulation. It shouldn't have got to that far. You know, the staff should have made that building look better. You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
And that's why I want to make sure that, you know, we're not architects up here adjusting the way a building looks, that you guys are doing that.
And that still is going to happen at that zoning level.
Okay.
It's at this high planning level that we'll still also be introducing some other elements in key areas, because we've recognized that some areas require more attention. Those would be sub areas, so there would be scenic lands or wildlife corridors. All of those still are identified on this character area plan and would essence end up in the future, when the time is appropriate, to have their own sub-area plans or specific plans, if you will. And that provides another level of certainty that we can make sure that we're not getting to that point where we're having to specifically define for every person coming forward what that project should look like. They should be able to determine it beforehand with a set of guidelines that we provide. So in essence, we're wanting to make sure that there are no surprises.
So to this point of the discussion, and there is sensitivity because, as Councilmember Hall said, we grew very fast. And when you're growing a community, you're thinking about function. You're thinking about, I got to have gas stations, I got to have, you know, city halls, I got to have neighborhoods, I've got to have these functions. And really very little attention was given to form. And so when we lose sight of form and we're just trying to get function in the ground, things happen. And so we did happen very fast as a community. And so there's a desire on the part of the community, now that we've got our function under control, when they look at a yellow blob, they say, okay, as long as we have our functions clear, that's good, but now let's integrate form and function, and making certain that we've got our functions clear. Let's make sure that we're building quality buildings, and so that it's a step up for the community. We're not just building, you know, willy-nilly and fast and furious, as it were. So that's, I think that's, this form-based code concept is something that the council has put a lot of their own investment into, of time and a desire to see to it that we are raising the bar. And while I do understand the desire to do these character communities, it's really important to all of us that we are able to drill down to the form and make certain that the function and the form are truly integrated. And we're not saying, by the way, if you want this big box retailer that you're dying for, you're not going to get just a box. That we get a box with perhaps some form sensitivities, because that's what's going to happen, and we've seen it. And so we want to make certain that we don't see that kind of thing happen again. When developments come in, we want them here, but we want them to fit in to the community in a way that is sensitive to a community that's really prides itself in being a quality community, not just something that happens quick, and we want something so bad we're willing to give things up in order to get it. So that's just a general comment about form and function and the importance of form-based code.
And you know, I agree totally, Mayor. And Eric, you're a professional at this, okay? I'm going to ask you a question. Does good design cost more money?
It depends. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But I mean, ultimately, you know, when you look at good design, more people want to be there. So in the end, I would say, you know, if people want to be living in that community because of the design of the community, I mean, you know, Verado is a great example. I mean, it's doing record business out there,
right? And
it's because there's, you know, heavy, you know, emphasis on design. Marley Park is one of the best performing communities right now in this community, and it's because it's the design issue.
Right.
You know, going Mayor Wolcott and Councilmember Hall, you know, going back to that form-based discussion, what we're really trying to build into this general plan is more of those form-based and guidelines. And these are just the guideline piece. Once we start drilling down into the zoning code, which we'll be updating over the next year, as well as we're partnering with the Public Works Department to create planning and engineering design standards. Those design standards are really the essence of your form and what form you want to see. So what we're doing here is kind of create an overall policy, and in the next, you know, in the next year or so, when we have these other updates, those will be the on the ground design elements, those types of you know, requirements. And then that way, you know, when a developer does come in, they see this, they're able to shuffle things around a little bit. So, you know, they're more willing to work with us on the design element when we go into the development. We also have to take into account that we have over 80 planned area developments in this community. And so when we want things like open space and connectivity and the wildlife corridors, we're going to need to be able to work with these property owners and developers on, okay, well, we want this. Here, you know, how are we going to make your project successful? You're already approved at this, so let's work together. And that way they can slide those densities around, as opposed to going in for like a formal general plan amendment, which could take, you know, add 6 months to a year to a project.
Councilmember Tandy.
Thanks. I'm kind of cheated. I went ahead and I looked at there's guidelines also for adjacent use and things like that, and I think that's interesting and good. I had a couple questions to get down there first. I saw transit-oriented development district noticed on there several places, and they look like they're appropriate places to me. A question about the future White Tanks Freeway. Would that also need it? I noticed it doesn't right now have it.
Yeah, that was kind of a topic of discussion. We also have that area in and around the Luke area and so forth. But we've left that out for the time being, just because it is in the future. But I would say subsequently we'd be coming up with updates and so forth.
So later on, if it makes sense, we could do an update of the general plan and do that. Second question, I got only 3. Interstate 11, is that going to come through our planning area right now at all, or?
As proposed, they're proposing it outside of our planning area.
Okay. And the third question, I brought this up kind of in this process several times, and I think I kind of understand but I'm wondering if it'd be appropriate to make a change in this next revision to one of the maps. I'm looking at the contour lines, and there's an employment area down by Peoria between Litchfield and Bullard, where the neighborhood's actually all built out, and it's still listed as employment. And the example I'm going to use is, there's another example, the northeast corner behind the Safeway on Waddell and Litchfield, northeast corner. We actually have Legacy Park in District 5, which also is in the contour line, but it is now moved to the yellow coating or residential. And I'm just wondering, would it make sense to move the one in the Copper Canyon Ranch that is built out, just the section where it is in the contour line, to move that during the revision? Or, and I realize if there's a developer that ever comes in and wants to take the entire 200 homes and pay for that, maybe it will be an employment thing at that time. But is there a way to recognize in the future, if anything like that happens, maybe it'll be employment, but at least for the people that live there right now, that just kind of recognize that they are residential?
Mayor Wolcott, Councilmember Tandy, one of the things we're hemmed in by is specifically state statutes. State statutes actually call out those contour lines, and in the state statutes, it basically states that they need to be more employment related. As a side note, we have the area that's kind of north there with the Lucox 1 that kind of curves up, where we have Asante North. In the first iteration, we actually had that kind of as a residential component since their zoning was in place, and Luke was heavily against that.
Right.
So in the case of the Copper Canyon Ranch, I think we're kind of hemmed in with statute, and we want to be good neighbors to Luke. That's kind of where we stood on it when we went through the process.
Right. And I realize it was a big issue about 10 years ago when that neighborhood was being built. But I'm wondering if that's something that we still have some time. Maybe we can do an outreach to the Luke Air Force Base and say, is this really an issue, or can we convert it?
If I may,
sure. It's
going to be an issue into perpetuity. It is not going to change. It is because it's like the F-35. It's the next 40 to 50 years of our lives here in this part of the country. It is a serious issue, so serious that we actually require, and you should probably know this as a realtor, that we actually require the JLUS maps in the realtors' vehicles, so that when they're selling a home, that they know that they are outside of those lines or inside those lines, as it were. This is a very sensitive issue. It is one that literally prompted, because of that one particular neighborhood's going over those lines, literally prompted state legislation. And we've been down this road before. It's not going to change. Right. And I certainly am.
Well, I just want to.
I just don't want to. I don't want to set false hopes, right. Because the reality is, it is state law, right. And it is the federal government, and it is in the F-35 program, which we fought so hard to bring here, and we're also moving forward to make certain that we're good partners with Luke Air Force Base in our other auxiliary field locations as well, and not not trying to, we really don't want to ruffle that feather again.
I definitely want us to remain good neighbors and partners with Luke. Just curious though, how did Legacy Park get that yellow designation then? Because they're also in that contour lane.
I believe they're right outside, aren't they? Yeah, the charter school, the Legacy School?
Not the charter school, but the neighborhood behind Safeway.
Isn't that Litchfield Manor?
Litchfield Manor.
Litchfield Manor.
Yeah, I'm getting the names mixed up.
Threw me a curve there.
That wasn't prior to the statute? Okay, I guess, and Lloyd was just briefing me, that was in prior to the statute kind of going through.
So is it
we can take a look at that though.
Timing issue. Because I'm just thinking, to me, it causes more confusion. I know what the intent is, and if we can somehow say, okay, if somebody ever does buy all 200 homes up, it will be an employment center down the road. That's the only thing they can do. But while there are 200 residents there living in my district, I want them to have some kind of assurance that they're not going to get their homes bulldozed down anytime in the future.
I mean, and ultimately, the zoning is what the zoning is on the property, Councilmember Tandy, and this is just kind of the long-term look. And for if someone came up with enough money to go in there and buy up 200 homes and bulldoze, that would be pretty impressive.
But it has happened.
Yeah,
it has happened.
Can't say it hasn't. Yeah.
I'll give you an example. I know some property near the beach in California where my family owns beach property, and that's kind of what's happening right there. It's been a long 20, 30-year process, but eventually I believe my family will end up losing the property because it was kind of a long, drawn-out process. That's where my concern's coming from. Thanks.
Mayor Wolcott, council members, we're coming up with 8 minutes left in the.
I'm so sorry.
So
this is a subject of great interest to the council.
So I'm not sure if maybe you want us to schedule another one of these, or if you want to keep going through the presentation.
How many pages do you have left? How many slides do you have left?
10 to 15.
Okay.
And I'm sure the other ones will garner quite a bit of conversation.
Right. Well, council, your pleasure. What would you like to do? Would you like to schedule an additional meeting?
I think so.
I think it would be best. I do think it would be best if we had an opportunity to. We don't want to give short shrift to this. Obviously, we've put a lot of emphasis on the importance of this. This is our future that we're talking about. So. The sooner we can put something together, that would probably be best if we can. So if we might, council members, can we just spend this next minute or two just kind of questioning and any questions on the slides and what we've discussed so far, and then maybe we can pick this up at a later date. Councilwoman Villanueva.
I just have one question. I totally agree with the future and for us to have something better for our city. Mm-hmm. But do you feel that we might be losing some developers if they don't want to, go through all the process of upgrading like we want to? Do you feel that some developers might not come in?
Mayor Wolcott, Councilmember Villanueva. Actually, I think this adds for a lot more flexibility to work with the development community, to be honest. This is one of the reasons we kind of went this way, because we have so much area that's already zoned, and we need to be able to work with them to get those higher and those better design standards. So I actually think, and even in our conversations through our stakeholder groups, they've all been pretty supportive of it. At first, they didn't really know how it was going to work. But I would say through that process, we've had a couple minor, the last stakeholder meeting we had, they were kind of really looking at kind of the sub-area plans that we were looking at and asking if they were going to be able to move forward without the sub-area plan in place. And that was the biggest concern. We said, yes, we would be moving forward. We would just be working in concert with you to try to define what the sub-area plan is, or at least providing some elements of how we can work it in. So I would say I think it's going to, if anything, I think it helps us with the development community.
Oh, good. Okay. All right. Thank
Councilmember Hall?
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, Eric, I just want to, just a comment. I want to compliment you on the open house meeting you had at Sun City Grand at Cimarron. There weren't a lot of people there. I think it was 15 people, but the quality of the people in terms of their questions and their engagement, I thought was fantastic. And I thought I thought the consultant and you guys did a good job, the way you laid out the easels, answered their questions. There was a couple of things that came up that I wasn't aware of, like the 404 washes.
Mm-hmm.
That's still out there. That isn't determined. That isn't, right?
It's still kind of a, and I'm going to characterize this wrong, it's still a rule in the rulemaking process of EPA,
Yeah.
but it hasn't necessarily been adopted.
Right.
You know, there are many of the states, and I believe you're going to see this. I think you're going to end up seeing a lot of these states sue if that rule does go forward.
Yeah, yeah, okay.
So I could be locked up.
And then the other thing, the other question somebody had was about, well, there was questions about stormwater, which I thought was interesting, but those people that ask about stormwater just moved here. They've only been here like 3 months, so they're curious about stormwater, how we handled it, which I thought was a good point. And another question about, are you guys, what was the question was, are you guys integrating the water plan into the land use plan? Which I thought was another great question.
Definitely.
We are, but I thought that was a good question. Yeah. And the other one that I wasn't sure about was the land mass of our waste management site. I don't know how much land they have out there. Do you?
Off the top of my head, I do not.
Well, it's something to find out. I mean,
Have a square mile? It looks to be a square mile.
they have a square mile. So how much more capacity do they have, or is it?
I think it was made mention at the meeting for 100 years.
Oh, okay.
I
So
believe.
They'll be there a while.
Okay, good.
Unless we're able to mine it and make energy out of it somehow.
All right. Thanks, Eric. But
That'd
good
be
job.
nice.
And I really got to, my hat goes off to Josh, Mike, and Lloyd Abrams, and everyone for putting all that stuff together. You know, they've been working very hard on this, and all the credit goes to them. And the consultant, of course.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you getting us this far, and I'm sorry we've kind of run low on time. But I look forward to picking up this discussion at the nearest possible date, and we'll work that out with the city manager as to when we can get ourselves back up to the schedule to try to keep you on schedule with the general plan amendment. So we don't want to delay your work. We just want to make sure that we're staying engaged. So thank you. All right. With that, I believe that comes to the end of our regular agenda. There is no executive session for this particular meeting, so I will entertain a motion.
I make a motion that we adjourn.
A motion has been made and seconded to adjourn this meeting. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. This meeting is adjourned.